Hi everyone, just before we get into this episode of Type 1 on 1, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for pressing play. I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, don't forget to hit subscribe and you'll be notified when new episodes come about. You can find us across podcast land on Spotify, iTunes, all those good places as well. Secondly, anything you hear on this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. I am, of course, not a professional, and you do need to seek advice from your healthcare team before making any changes to your diabetes management. And lastly, if you want to say hello, I do have an Instagram page specifically for the Type 1 on 1 podcast. You can find it at Studio Type 1 on 1. That's at Studio Type 1, the number, on 1, the number. And you can also come and say hello and follow me on my personal page, which is at Miss Jen Greaves. And all of that will be noted in the episode description. Hi everyone, and welcome to Type 1 on 1, a podcast that delves into the obscure, complex and challenging world of life with Type 1 diabetes. I'm Jen Greaves, and each week, with the help of some brilliant guests, I'll be showing that there is no normal when it comes to handling this whopper of a chronic condition, because we're all pretty much figuring out the messiness of day-to-day life with diabetes as we go. And most of all, even though it doesn't always feel like it, we are absolutely not alone. Rhodes and Alana Ritenour are not your average couple, nor your average attorneys. They're also characters of their own book series, The Adventures of Rhodes and Alana. One page at a time, 8-year-old Rhodes and his best friend Alana explore what it means to be a child with a chronic condition, turning the challenges of type 1 diabetes into intrepid adventures. And today we're going to dig into how the series was inspired by Rhodes' own journey with type 1 diabetes after he was diagnosed in the 80s at just 5 years old. But first, let's say hello. Welcome both of you to the podcast, and thank you so much, Rhodes and Alana, for joining me.
Oh, it's terrific to be here, Jen. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you. It was a pleasure to meet you in Amsterdam, and thank you very much for having us on your podcast.
We're so happy to be here. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. I wrote it all by myself. First test done. Did I get your surname right as well?
You crushed it. Thank you.
Great. I like to check. And you're joining me from Richmond in Virginia today, which is very exciting. And it's not every day I get to speak to two book characters either.
Well, we have loved our work in the diabetes space. Obviously, it's a project of passion for us, being involved in that community, but then also our children's book series. And we launched it about 4 years ago. Alana and I both were practicing law and we're very busy. And Alana wanted to retire for several reasons, but the primary focus was to work on our children's book series.
Yeah. This is something that we've
That's
long talked about
incredible.
doing.
Wow, really? For years? Was it something that had been in your mind?
It was. We had actually written transcripts about 12 years ago and put them on the shelf. And every once in a while, we'd pull them off and work on it very vehemently for about 6 weeks. And then a major life event would happen. We would change jobs or have a child, and they would go back on the shelf. And finally, when our children were 8 and 6, respectively, we realized that if we don't get these books out now, we probably never will, because they're the target audience. We can talk to their friends. And probably what's been most fortuitous is they've been an internal focus group for us. And so we really felt like we needed to get them out. So we published book number 1, School Bus Secret, about 3 years ago. We published Bully Blues, our second book in the series, last year. And in about 3 weeks, so certainly in May of this year, we will have Zoo Goes Wild will be our third book in the series.
Very exciting. And Alana's just showed us, for those who are watching, you can see the beautiful cover and the beautiful illustrations as well. And you were telling me that the actual physicality of the characters is part you, part your children, which I just absolutely love. How was it seeing those books for the first time in the flesh, if you like?
Oh, it's just incredible. It's so, so fun. Yeah, our children, because they were the age of our characters, who are 8 years old in second grade in our stories, we had images of our children as 8-year-olds. And we really wanted to meld our look so you could recognize Rhodes and Alana's physical features. I'm trying to see. Here's here's a sneak peek of book 3, and Rhodes and Alana's physical features. So you would recognize it as us, and we could really tell the story had we met at 8, what our adventures would be like with Rhodes as the type 1 and me as his best friend. But we wanted modern characters, right? So we showed our illustrator pictures of us in the 80s and maybe not the most relatable dress and look. So then we also provided pictures of our children. And literally the outfit that Virginia wears in our first book, School Bus Secret, she wore to her first day of 2nd grade with the knee socks and everything. She loves bright colors. She's head to toe pink. And in the story, Rhodes talks about this new girl in school that he just met, and she's running up the street and she looks like bubblegum bouncing down the road because of her pigtails and her pink top.
Well, and the other thing that's great too is our son looks a lot like I did when I was 8 years old anyway. So giving a picture of me today and a picture of him then, you can see the similarities to be sure. And we, as any reader of the books will notice, we were very adamant about the bright colors and the wardrobe, because it's not only how we dress, but also now that we have our series established, one of our goals in our business plan is to ultimately launch a clothing line that will match exactly what the characters are wearing in each book. So the idea would be that you could buy book 2 and have the outfit that Alana wears in book 2, in both a child size and an adult size. So you could twin if you wanted to, but that's really another story for another day. But that's why the illustrations are so distinct in our books. But, Jen, the thing that's interesting is we didn't know each other when we were 8. We didn't meet until we finished law school. But the story of us as 8-year-olds in the fictional series is much like the story that we live today, with me trying to manage type 1 diabetes day in and day out, and Alana being my best friend and support person who's here, who wants to hear about what I'm struggling with, who wants to help. And so we're trying to be emblematic of that in each of the books.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. And there's just so much in that. I wanted to ask you later, but maybe I'll ask you now. What was out there for you as a young child in terms of being able to find ways that felt relatable to learn about your condition? Was there anything? Because we have superhero comics, we have whole Marvel worlds, but getting that information about type 1 diabetes, about something that you need to know about because it's your life. As you say, the fashions change and the friendships evolve, but type 1 diabetes is absolutely constant, as you know, and as I know, and as I imagine everyone listening knows. So for you as a child, what was out there for you to kind of relate to in terms of your type 1 diabetes?
Not very much. I was diagnosed about 3 weeks into kindergarten as a 5-year-old on October the 10th, 1983. And back then, they kept you in the hospital for 2 weeks till they felt like you knew how to manage the condition with your parents, and then they sent you on your way. And there may have been a one-off book, Sally goes to the hospital or Johnny gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but there was certainly no book, TV show, comic book that had a character who had type 1 diabetes and was living life to the fullest. So that was certainly a motivator for us to get the series started and get it out in as many hands as possible. And even today, we haven't found a series that's like ours, that's focused on children who need to be read to because they're still so young, but also a chapter book with each page illustrated that can be really interesting for someone who's just learning to read later in elementary school. And a market that we didn't expect was type 2 grandparents have been buying the book and reading it to their grandchildren to help them understand about their condition.
And an audience that we knew we were targeting, raising children, we see that every family deals with something, whether it's a different chronic condition, food allergies, behavioral struggles, emotional struggles, anxiety,
autism.
You have children that are dealing with issues that make them unique, that create challenges, but also are things that their friends should learn about, and they should learn how they can be supportive and helpful. And so we really felt like if we could introduce a relatable character with type 1, which we really think it was for the first time, that children, a broad audience of children, would appreciate his struggles, would learn a little bit about type 1, but also would relate and see themselves in this character that's really trying to be positive, persistent with his management,
proactive.
but he struggles, in our first story. The story goes that Rhodes is meeting Alana for the first time, and he has that internal dialogue as an 8-year-old, which so many children do. Should I tell her? Is she going to be grossed out when I prick my finger here on the street? I think my blood sugar's dropping. In the first story, he's not on a CGM. He's got to prick his finger. Will she help me? Is she going to run away? I mean, really basic second grader type thoughts. And he ultimately says, look, if she's going to be my friend, she's got to know about this. And so I'm just going to tell her. And thankfully, in the story, Alana embraces it the way you would hope. She's curious. She's amazed. She's impressed with what he does. She wants to learn more about it, and she really wants to be helpful. And she's so excited when she gets to provide the snack. Like, oh, you need something for your blood sugar? Here, I've got something. Do you want this? So it's a story that we hope will play out with friends and friendships.
Yeah, the idea really is to normalize the chronic condition and educate about it, but also show that you can, with the right support and the right friends around you, you can live life to the fullest. And while our lived experience is diabetes, it is emblematic of any chronic condition. And we actually address bullying in book 2, Bully Blues. And, like Alana said, if you're asthmatic or you have food allergies or you're on the spectrum, that could be you. Rhodes could be you as well. And in book 2, it turns out that the young baseball teammate who is bullying Rhodes for having to take breaks to check his blood sugar and get snacks and see his parents ends up having a food allergy.
Now, don't give too much away because we want her audience to buy the book.
I should have given a spoiler alert. But I actually, gave that much away, but I didn't say how it ends.
Yes, and I mean, to buy the book for all of these reasons. And you mentioned there about it being second grade thoughts, but actually, these are thoughts I still have when I'm introducing, quote unquote, my type 1 diabetes as part of me to new people I'm meeting when I'm traveling, or I've talked about it through dating endless times. That is another podcast in itself. But you have to bring this into the relationship because it is a big part of your life, and opening up those conversations, like you say, whether it's type 1 diabetes or something else, normalizing those conversations is such a powerful message. So congratulations to you guys on that. And also just something that universally resonates, I think, which is incredibly helpful. So it really struck me how prominent Alana as a friend is through these books, because it's Rhodes's condition, of course. But as I just said, like, there are other people impacted by this. You know this well, Alana, as the partner of someone living with type 1 diabetes. I think it can be quite a tricky thing to address for the person living with it to articulate those needs. I'm wondering, in relation to how you guys met, whether you can tell me a little bit about how diabetes was brought into the conversation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So true. When we first met, I knew nothing about diabetes, let alone type 1 diabetes, autoimmune conditions. I didn't know anything about the day in and day out management. And actually, there's a funny story, because early in our dating life, I invited Rhodes to come meet my parents, and he came and had lunch at our house. And my family and my parents, they didn't know anything about it either. And during lunch, his pump was going off and it was beeping, and then he was checking it. And my mom pulled me aside into the other room and she said, "Why is he constantly on that pager? Drug dealers are on their pagers all the time." And I said, Mom, I think it's okay. I don't think he's selling illegal drugs. He told me it's an insulin pump, and I don't know why it beeps constantly, and I don't know how it works, but I assume he needs to check it while he's eating because it has something to do with his blood sugar. And that's all I knew. And so then years go by, and I need to learn everything there is to learn about it. And, you talk about dating and marital decisions. And I've been asked before, what did you think about making that commitment? Did it make you question whether you wanted to move forward in the relationship, whether you would take this on for a lifetime? And honestly, my impression of Rhodes was that his type 1 diabetes made him who he is, helped to make him who he is, and makes him someone who is formidable against anything that life would throw at us. because is he perfect in his management? No. Does he struggle with his management? Yes. But does he, for the most part, keep a positive attitude and is proactive and he doesn't let it stop him? I thought, well, gosh, he's going to be a good partner because he's not going to let things slow him down or stop him. And so at the end of the day, it was a positive thing that made him who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's I've always tried to really remain positive, and thank you for saying that. I think there's a special place in heaven for type 1 parents and those who choose to marry a type 1. Um, but I think it's easy for me as a person who's always had incredible support, always had access to the latest and greatest technology, always been insured, to be positive. And I realize it's awful easy for people who don't have those privileges to not be positive. But for me, because I've been privileged to have those luxuries, and I've it's helped me stay positive. I've also been blessed not to have any complications, and so I've been able to sort of discern certain parts of my life and certain characteristics that I have that I have not in spite of diabetes, but because of diabetes. And I know, Jen, you've lived with it for some time, 30 years, it sounds like, and you have to learn self-discipline. You have to learn mental and physical toughness. You have to learn perseverance. There's just a lot of skills, and that's another book for another day that we're working on, actually. um, but
Right.
but that's sort of the way we've tried to sell it to our children and sell it to our friends and family, that you can take a negative and you can turn it into a positive if you really look at it the right way. And fortunately for me, I'm very blessed that that's how Alana looked at it from the get-go.
It's just really beautiful to hear you two talk about each other in this way. I actually have quite a lot of listeners who have been diagnosed as adults. So they're learning this new lexicon for themselves, this new life for themselves that looks very different to the one they were used to living before. And to introduce that to other people is very hard. As I said, I still do that because I'm freelance, the nature of my life. I introduce myself to people all the time. And I think that's so reassuring for people who are new to this or are adapting to it to hear. And it's so beautiful that you guys have that for each other as well, and have spread that through the community and the family and friends impacted, because it isn't just us in this, like you say, the parents, the friends, the wider family, grandparents, all of that.
You know, it's really interesting. We hear from people quite often about diagnosis as you're a child versus an adult, and we're seeing, of course, a proliferation of adult diagnosis, which no one's exactly sure why that's changed so much, but it's the fact of life. And on one hand, if you're diagnosed like I was at 5, I certainly have memories that were pre-diabetic memories, but
Not many.
not many, and they're fading. And so this has always been a part of my life for the most part. Um, and so on one hand, as an adult, it's sort of a easier to manage and easier to talk about because you don't really know any other way. Of course, you kind of wish you'd been diagnosed as an adult because you could have had all that life without it, and you're at less risk of ultimately having complications. But when you're diagnosed as an adult, or I think could be even worse as a teen, when you're dealing with all the other things that teenagers have to deal with, it's really difficult because you know how to live another way and you know how to introduce yourself in another way. And having to always have diabetes be such a part of your life and an integral part of you, and having to nuance and change into that, I can understand would be very difficult, which is versus me, it's always been part of me. And I know it's probably not politically correct in some circles to refer to a person as a diabetic because there's so much more and they shouldn't be labeled as by their disease or their chronic condition. But I'm proud to call myself a diabetic because it's such an integral part of my life and it's part of who I am.
Yeah, I can really relate to that as someone who has lived with it for a large percentage of their life, but also, we're here. It's kind of made me who I am. All those things you talk about: resilience, adaptability, empathy, the awareness that everybody has something. I don't dismiss the realities and the challenges and the times it makes me so afraid, but there is so much other stuff as well that I don't think I would have acknowledged for myself or developed for myself without type 1. So this probably is a good point to take it back to your diagnosis, if that's okay, Rhodes. I don't know if you remember much about that time.
Actually, I was very fortunate. I did not go into DKA.
Okay.
But I did have all the telltale symptoms. Um, but luckily my parents were just on it, and we caught it soon enough that I wasn't technically in DKA. But I was going about my business, very active 5-year-old kid, and I was going to the bathroom a lot. I was drinking a lot of water. I was lethargic. I hadn't really lost any weight yet, and my parents took me to the pediatrician.
You were
And
wetting the bed as a potty trained kindergartner who was going to school and was very capable of that. Your parents noticed that
yeah,
you were consuming so much water that you wet the bed a couple nights. And so it was just sort of an ordinary, let's take you to the pediatrician because something seems off.
Yeah, there's actually a funny aside about that. When I started kindergarten, apparently each family was asked to send in a bag of clothes for their child in case their child had an accident at school. And so my parents had sent in just some, awful clothes that I would never wear because they didn't expect I'd ever have to wear them, or that and they didn't expect to ever get them back. And so there's very few pictures of photographs of me at that time in my life. People have asked us who are doing podcasts or doing publicity for our books, hey, do you have any pictures of you as a newly diagnosed kid? And I think there's one. I'm sitting in my hospital bed with a bunch of flowers around that people sent, and for some reason there's a naked baby doll in that picture. But we found a picture the other day when we were going through some stuff of me with a red plaid shirt on, and these just awful orange plaid shorts.
And that are like 6 sizes too small.
6 sizes too small. I look like a Vienna sausage. And so so then we looked at it, and we looked at the back of it, and the back of it said October 1983. And so I had been to school and had wet my pants at school and had to use the shorts that my mom had sent in that were awful and didn't match or anything. And that apparently when we got home, for some reason, they took a picture of me, and I have that is my second picture of the diagnosis period of time. But that was another thing that was, I wet my pants at school, which I had never done before. And so my parents took me to the pediatrician. The pediatrician took my blood sugar. I don't know what it was. I wish I did. But he knew right away that it was probably type 1 diabetes. We did not know what that was. We didn't know the symptoms. We just knew something wasn't right, which was the impetus for us to go see him. And he said, you can't even go 20 minutes home to get your belongings. I need you to go right across town to the hospital now. And so that's what we did. And they kept us for 2 weeks, and we had a parade of doctors and nurses who came through who were terrific. I still see some of them today, 41 years later.
That's lovely.
But the thing that I remember mostly was probably that my mother was a school teacher. And so there was a parade of her colleagues that came by to see us during those 2 weeks, and some of her students came by to see us too, which was really meaningful. And much like in the book, when Rhodes first meets Alana in book 1, I had no idea how I was going to be received when I went back to kindergarten, because some of these kids I had only known for 3 weeks before I had to leave for 2. But I was just welcomed back with open arms. They had made banners to welcome me back. There were balloons. And I was just so embraced. And I'm blessed to say that I have had very few interactions in 41 years of people who weren't supportive, who bullied me, or I can't remember being bullied. And the coaches and the teachers and the guidance counselors and the school nurses were all terrific. So I ultimately got back home. And the thing that I remember most, and this last year when I was had the privilege of being chairman of the National Board of Directors for the American Diabetes Association, I told this story a lot, which is I had to check my blood sugar regularly, and we had a vial of test strips. And so you'd pull a test strip out, and you'd stick your finger with a really wide needle, and you would put a glob of blood on the test strip. And my mother had to look at her watch for a minute. And when a minute happened, you would take a cotton ball, and you would take the blood, daub the blood off of the strip. You would wait another minute, and then you would turn the vial over, and the vial on the back of the vial had 4 or 5 colors that all represented a range of blood glucose of about 40 or 50 points. So if it was blue, it may be somewhere between 140 and 200. If it was red, it may be somewhere between 200 and 250. So if you manage to do all those things right, you only knew within about 50 points of how your blood sugar was. My mother actually went to a local jeweler while I was in the hospital and bought a watch that had a second hand so she could do this for me. Fast forward to when I was out of college, the technology had certainly changed a lot. I was still doing shots and sticking my finger when I got out of college, but then fast forward to today where I wear an insulin pump and have a continuous glucose monitor that's reading my blood sugar every 1 to 5 minutes and conveying it to my insulin pump, and then my insulin pump clicks into action. It's been shocking, and it's amazing to see how the technology has changed, thanks to the good work of organizations like Breakthrough T1D and the ADA, ETTD. That we are where we are. We still need that elusive cure to be sure, but we've come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. It really blows my mind. It still does. What was your day-to-day like? I'm just curious because as you describe those stories, obviously it's so different to what we deal with today, like you say, looking at our phones and things like that. Did you have a very strict regime? Did you have to eat the same things every day? Obviously these finger pricks took minutes rather than seconds. Do you remember moving through school and what that was like?
I remember having a lot of alcohol pads everywhere because my hands were seemingly always dirty, and we needed to check my blood sugar all the time on a baseball field, on a golf course, wherever we happened at school.
You still like to play in the dirt.
There were a lot of alcohol pads that kept my fingers clean to stick them. I remember that my parents were always had snacks for me. They wanted me to be self-sufficient from a pretty early age. So from about 5 to 12, they were very involved. And then my pediatric endocrinologist, an incredible human being from the University of Virginia Medical Center, Dr. Bill Clark, he said when I was 12, I had to do it all on my own. And so basically from that point forward, my parents were certainly there to help, but I ran the show myself. And it was just a matter of taking shots when I needed to and sticking my finger when I needed to. As we've said a lot in our diabetes support group, which we founded in 2010, a diabetic diet and diabetic protocols are really good for the whole family. So my mother and father ate what I ate. My brother's 12 years older, and when he was around, he ate like I ate.
And I can comment on this because I'm the cook in the family. I wouldn't call myself a chef by any means, but I enjoy it. And I have always been interested in nutrition and healthy eating. And so this was something I was happy to take on. And it has been a little bit of a challenge with Rhodes to get him outside of the box because I do think you and your family must have had routine in when you ate and what you ate because Rhodes will literally eat the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and probably dinner. And when I first met him, he literally ate the same thing. There's a wrap he would make, like with a low carb wrap with deli meat and cheese and maybe some lettuce. And he, for lunch every single day, he wants his, higher protein yogurt every morning. And then for dinner, he would make himself a salad and he would, when we first started dating and he'd say, come over for dinner, you assume that if you come over for dinner on a Monday and you come over for dinner on a Thursday, maybe you would eat something different. Well, when you came over to Rhodes and he said, do you want to have dinner with me? We would eat the same. I mean, it was like Groundhog Day every time you came over. And he said, I bake chicken on Sunday night so that I have it for the week. And then I make this salad and he would rough cut up vegetables and he would have this giant salad that you would eat out of a mixing bowl.
Oh, that
which was, its own issue, but he would create this massive salad of vegetables and this chicken, and he was delighted to eat it every single night. And I think it's the routine of, I know how many carbs are in this. I know how my body handles it. And I suspect when your mother would see that your blood sugar was in a decent range after a certain meal, she would say, okay, we're replicating
that meal must have worked.
So you ate the same thing over and over.
And that's true. And the other thing, Jim, which you'll appreciate is in the 80s and 90s, it was not a carb counting movement. I didn't know about carb counting. I didn't hear about it. I didn't have that.
It wasn't on the back of food packages.
I did not have that inculcated until I was out of college. And it was about sugar. And so oftentimes our plate was a vegetable, a small starch, and a lean protein. And it looked, everything was the same color. There's a chicken breast, there's a half of a baked potato, and there is a cauliflower. And so you were talking about trying not to eat sugar, whatever that means. So
when I started introducing like exotic things, my family's Ukrainian, and so we occasionally eat beets, and he was like, "Ooh, what's that redness? Indian food, Asian stir fry." You were like, "I'm not sure about this."
But no, it's all been great, and of course it's easier to manage since we count carbs and we have our pumps. But we would never have thought about, and I think about all those years that I wasn't managing as well as I could because I didn't have that knowledge. It certainly wasn't my parents' fault. Maybe it wasn't even my fault, but because we didn't know any better. And I will say that you ask about the day-to-day, the most difficult time for me, the highest A1Cs I had were during puberty when hormones were changing. I don't know that I was ever really pushing back on the disease and really not sort of doing what I was supposed to, but it certainly was a period of time where I was focused on other things and had a lot of distractions. And so I would say from like 11 to 14 was probably the time where my control was not nearly as good as it was up to that time and after. I don't think I ever rebelled against management, but that if there ever was a time I was close, it was probably then.
Yeah, there's just so much that resonates there. We don't know what we don't know. The lack of carb counting. When I was diagnosed, to your point about the sugar versus carbs, I was told in the same breath that I could never eat sweets again, that I had to eat a 70% carbohydrate diet. So the logic there, even from the professionals, to see how far that's come now, is quite incredible. That's what I was advised. I had to starch my way through life, but no sugar. But as we know now, starch ends up as sugar once it's broken down by the body. So it's really interesting to hear. And equally with the hormones, that's sort of where my path went, similar to yours, probably further away. But I was just doing what I'd always done, but I was living in a completely different body by the time I was 17, 18, with the hormones and everything. And the regime that I'd had since I was a child didn't fit me anymore, but I was still doing the same thing. So I had the same understanding as you that I, quote unquote, thought I was doing the right thing. I certainly wasn't prioritizing my type 1 diabetes, don't get me wrong, but it really resonates there, what you're saying. What you did mention was your positive outlook and the support you've had since you were diagnosed at that young age. Do you think, you speak about the baseball and obviously you've gone on to have an incredible career. Do you think that the attitude of the people around you and the adults when you were diagnosed and through your childhood years contributed to that, in the sense of it not holding you back and you being quite accepting of it and being able to go out and go after your dreams and your interests and your hobbies and your sports alongside living with type 1 diabetes?
I don't think there's any question. I think that the acceptance of people I admired of me as a diabetic inspired me to not feel different or disadvantaged or out of the ordinary or weird. And so it just allowed me to be a part of me, maybe what made me different in a positive way. Um, but having that around me really inspired me to try to treat others who are different, treat them well because of the way they witnessed to me. But I think that if I had had probably even one, certainly a handful of people who had made me feel less than equal or had made me feel different and as an outlier, I think it would have probably had a negative impact on my positivity and a negative impact on how I manage the disease. It would have made me wish I didn't have it more. It would have made me want to hide it from other people so they wouldn't bully me. Um, it would not have empowered me to start volunteering with the ADA at an early age to get other people to talk about it or go to camps or walks where there are other people who are dealing with the same thing that's so important for you to have those kind of conversations. It would have probably pushed me into my shell, but instead it pulled me out. And I think there's probably a lot that you could point to, me being an extrovert, It empowered me to be an extrovert, to talk about my diabetes and all things. It never inhibited me from talking about other things because I happen to have this underlying condition. And I think
Rhodes, I think credit is also due to your parents, because I don't know if this is a product of just your parents' parenting styles in the 80s, but they expected everything of you that they expected of your brother. And they expected you to continue doing your chores and continue prioritizing your life. And you loved golf and you traveled and went to golf tournaments. And there was never a discussion that you weren't going to be able to do that, or you weren't going to participate in all the sports. You weren't going to play high school baseball. You couldn't be a pitcher if you wanted to do. It was just, you will do those things, and you will have all the expectations of, working your hardest in school and in life, and going to church with us. And it was never allowed to be an excuse.
or justification for not doing something.
Yeah.
It was really, and you're right, they do deserve a lot of credit for that. Look, if you've got to be your best in school, you've got to do your best in sports, whatever it is you're doing. And if it means that you have to prepare more because you've got to manage your diabetes so that you can be at your best on all these other fronts, that's up to you. And you've got to be the one to manage that. And so by them, it's like a lot of things. If you set a high expectation on a kid, they're probably going to meet it, if not exceed it. And I think there's probably a lot to be said for that. And I think that expectation that they put on me to manage my disease so that I would be ready to manage these other parts of my life, as we said earlier, Jen, it's taught me how to try to take that same tact to other components of my life, our marriage, raising our children, practicing law, working for a health system, volunteering in the ADA, in the diabetes space, whatever that is. I think probably all started with, hey, kid, you got to manage your disease so that you can be effective in the other fronts. And so we still try to do that today.
And I'll just say there's some component also of you of not always expecting perfection. Like, I think something that you learn, and you can probably relate to, Jen, is you could do everything right in a day, and you ate the right breakfast, you got up and exercised, but then you had a stressful Zoom call and all of a sudden your blood sugar's through the roof and you're like, what the heck? How is this happening? Or, you're getting sick, and so your blood sugar spikes. And so there is also that component of, okay, I tried my best, and at some point I can't fix this. I'm just going to be high this afternoon and I'm going to have to deal with it. And so it's also a relatable lesson in, your life hasn't been perfect. You don't crush everything. You're amazing. You don't crush everything in your life, but you learn to sort of accept it and say, maybe I'll get it. I'm going to work hard, and maybe I'll get it next time.
And I think it also compels you to put a higher standard on other people. Hey, they don't have a chronic condition, so they should be at their best, or they do have a chronic condition and they're empowered to manage it and be at their best. But it also, while holding people to a high standard and expecting a lot out of them, you also give them grace because you realize that something could be going on in the background, something could be going on at home. They could have missed their meds, they could have not afforded their meds, whatever it is. So you expect a lot out of people, which is what the tack we try to take with our kids, but you also give somebody grace if they can't quite get there.
Yeah, beautiful messages. Side note, I really hope this isn't one of the Zoom calls that's raising your glucose levels.
No, not at all.
No, not in the least. This is good for our souls.
Yes, same. Absolutely same. This episode of Type 1 is sponsored by Insulet, the makers of Omnipod tube-free insulin pump therapy. I've personally used pod therapy to manage my type 1 diabetes for years, and using Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery has improved my diabetes management significantly, with less diabetes decisions and, of course, no multiple daily injections. How? Well, Omnipod 5 automatically adjusts my insulin every 5 minutes to help keep me in range, allowing life outside of type 1 diabetes to get bigger. If you want to find out more, head to omnipod.com. I'm curious, as you're saying all this, Alana, how this has shaped you as someone who is taking this on as well, and you have children. How, what you've learned through being with Rhodes, because there's so much in this and you guys are such a team. I'm just curious for the parents that are listening or the partners that are listening from your point of view.
Well, thank you. It's parenting is the hardest job I've ever done. And there's no question in that, because you want to raise good little humans, but you realize they see everything you do and they absorb everything that's around them. And we're not perfect and we try hard, but they see all the successes and the failures. But I do think one thing that we've made a point of doing is having them be a part of life with diabetes. So, and Rhodes is especially good at this. They've seen him checking his blood sugar. They've seen him putting his insertion sites in. They see him making food choices. They see him having lows and having to tell the people around him, I can't talk right now. Hold on, I got to treat this. I'm not feeling so hot. And it's part of their experience that they are learning that it's possible to live with this disease and manage it. And it requires a lot of work and a lot of preparation. So I think that's good that we try to involve them in life with diabetes. And it's caused me as a parent to say, as we were going down the road of having children, realizing that because we have a parent with type 1, our children are significantly more likely to develop it. It's something that I've always had in the back of my mind, that if I can ease the transition in any way by giving them some tools, then, you see the children that are mad or just angry at this disease, and you've robbed me of the life I had before. So if I can give them some tools, we talk about carb counting. So it's just kind of part of our ordinary discussion. When child says, Mom, can I have another cookie? The first question I ask is, well, what's the serving size? And so, they at 7 years old could check a box and say, oh, it's 2 cookies. And I already had 2 cookies. Yeah, buddy, you already had 2 cookies. And we know how many carbs are in that. So let's go have something else. And so then they're already thinking in terms of, how can I do that equation? A serving size is this, that's how many cookies I get, how many carbs are in that. And so then I'm thinking then it would be easy to do that next step of, I need X amount of insulin. So whether that ever occurs and they will need those skills, whether either child is ever diagnosed, it's because there's some normalcy to the life with type 1. And again, they're good skills. I think I'm making this child have a healthy respect for a healthy lifestyle. So exercise is important. Eating in moderation is important. Eating a colorful, healthy, low carb diet has its advantages. So there are so many positive
sugary drinks are literally off the table.
It's the positive things that we can bring to their lives, and they still eat junk, and their Easter basket still had candy in it. So we're not trying to keep them from experiencing things. Like Rhodes has never had cotton candy. Do you think that's weird?
Never had it.
As a Brit, I don't think it's weird, but I'm not sure if that translates across the ocean.
Almost everybody.
Every American child has had a big fluffy,
and they have it all over their face and down their arms. But almost everybody that I've told that to a person has said, you're not missing out on much.
Adults say that.
Adults say you're not missing out on much. If they're,
yeah, I would agree.
If you hadn't had another,
have you had it?
I have had it. I actually remember the first time I tried it because it is something you see in the movies all the time.
Right.
And I think there was a fair or something here and it was there and my dad was like, okay. And I remember just being a bit like, oh, okay.
Chocolate, just okay.
Let down.
I prefer the ice cream. Yeah.
I learned something new about cotton candy recently, actually. It's so much air. There's so much fluff that the amount of carbs from sugar is actually much less than you would expect.
So we got to watch out for the hypos on that one.
Yeah, you're right. You bolus too much for cotton candy, then you might have the bottom might fall out. But no, their situational awareness is very high when it comes to diabetes. What I need to do, what Alana does for our family, and we're very much all in it together. And they do heartwarming things all the time. Like Rhodes had, I actually have it right here I just happen to have it here on my desk. He had an assignment at school that said, if you had $100 and you couldn't keep it, what would you do? And he wrote, if I had $100 and I could not keep it, I would give it to a place called JDRF to help cure my dad's type 1 diabetes. then I can tell other people that they should donate to JDRF.
Now breakthrough too, Wendy.
Then the scientist might find out a cure, and we could celebrate.
Oh my gosh.
And he did that. We didn't prompt him to do that. And actually last year, Virginia Grace had a similar assignment. It was a reading comp assignment where they were given certain facts and they had to write a little story, and it was a genie in a bottle. And she said that she would use one of her wishes to cure diabetes. And I actually opened up my last board meeting as chair of the ADA with that story, because she actually had apparently read our children's books, because she said that she wanted to cure diabetes, and then she had a period, and then she put and other chronic conditions. So she was looking out for me first, but she was thinking about other people too. So they are very attuned to this. And, when we started this work, I can remember as a newly diagnosed diabetic going to the local chapter of the American Diabetes Association and stuffing envelopes for a mailer for a walk or for a gala or something to raise money for a cure. And so here we are 40 years later, and I'm blessed to be on the ADA board. And all along, up until about 12 years ago, I was really trying to find a cure for myself and selfishly. And now I'm to the point where we're really focused on trying to do everything we can, still focused on a cure, but it's really for them, so that if heaven forbid they're ever diagnosed, we can flip them to a cure really quickly. And I think we're getting closer and closer. But it's amazing how attuned they are to sort of the life we have to lead, and how supportive they've been, just like those kids that welcomed me back into my kindergarten class.
Wow, that really says it all. I'm so touched by that. That must have, I don't know how that made you feel as parents, but my goodness me, if you needed a little boost that you're doing a good job as parents, that'll do it, right?
You need that boost, because you question every day as a parent, am I doing right? Am I helping them be everything they can? It's a fine line between breaking their spirit, not wanting to do that, but also wanting to keep them in line.
Well, and that's in our support group. That's who we probably, and also when we make appearances at walks and galas and go to galas, the groups that probably come up to us the most are the newly diagnosed parents. And they're just really scared, and they're up all night because they care so much, and they don't want their kids to go too high or too low at night. And they're learning about all these new technological tools. They're also trying to manage their other children who aren't diagnosed, at least yet. They're working. They're doing all the things that anybody would do, but they have this new thing, and so
That's life and death.
That's life and death that they're having to manage. And so that's part of our passion in keeping the support group going, is to reach those newly diagnosed parents and families, because they're the ones that I think are probably struggling the most.
Yeah, absolutely. It strikes me that you mentioned there, you were selfishly in search of your own cure. And I think we're all here based on our own experience. So I don't think that's a negative thing, because it's the stuff that changes us, that drives us forward, in my experience, to want to help or share a message to others. But this was you from a very young age, and it's continued throughout a very busy, very successful career, raising children, founding the support group, and being on these boards. Like, that's a lot. What motivates you, or has motivated you since a young age, to keep wanting to help, to keep getting this message out there and sharing your own experience with a view to helping others?
There has to be some reason, or that I was diagnosed with diabetes, or there has to be some way that I can turn it into a signal, or a way to make it into a positive. And I can't help but know a lot about diabetes management, because I have to deal with it every day. And so, to some degree, it would be selfish if I didn't share what I've learned, as long as I give the caveat that I don't have all the answers and that I'm not perfect myself. Just being able to practically share what I've learned in 41 years, I feel like is not only something that um, that gives me satisfaction, but it's almost a duty. And I've said a lot of times that my service on the ADA board is a privilege, but it's also really a duty.
And it really gives us hope, Rhodes. Like, I think one of the reasons we are so positive, I mean, this disease is awful. You have to say it's awful. It's relentless. It's difficult. It's, as we said, it's life and death. We don't want to cherry coat it because it's not something that we want Rhodes, our children, or anyone to have to live with. But but the positive attitudes that we have, we think, is because of all this work that he and I have done, because it gives us hope. Because by volunteering in organizations that are collecting money, donations from companies and individuals and families who aren't affected by this disease, and you see the amount of generosity that goes into funding research and clinical trials and these hopes for a cure. I mean, that's what gives us hope. That's what gives us motivation to press forward, to keep Rhodes healthy for as long as possible, to work for a cure, and to volunteer our time, because you have to stay positive. You have to be hopeful, or it really could overwhelm you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I feel like, sure, it'd be great not to have diabetes. We would be active in another way on working on something else in our community. That would be terrific. But since we are stuck with diabetes, that's what we know the most about, and I feel like that's where we can have the most impact. And to Alana's point, if you just think about how crazy our world is and how there are a lot of bad people out there, if you want an experience that you can feel good about yourself and good about the world, go to a Breakthrough Type 1 Diabetes Gala and see the people who are doing the best they can to raise the children who have it, and how generous they are, and in the same boat, rowing it in the same direction, trying to chase this elusive cure. And you think, gosh, if this could just be a microcosm of the world, we would all treat our neighbors differently. We'd all be better people. We wouldn't have so much political unrest. So going to something like that, or a diabetes camp, or a diabetes walk or ride, that people are there supportive, and they've got banners that have their children's names on them, and people are being so supportive. That gives us hope, but also makes us feel a lot better about the world. And it's a place where we feel like we actually have the knowledge to contribute. Whereas I think there's plenty of things that we could get involved in where we wouldn't know up from down.
And I'll just say one last thing, is we had the pleasure of going to a diabetes technology conference recently, and that's where we met you. And, you hear a lot of negative things maybe about big pharma or corporations that are industry. But then you go to one of these conferences and you see the brilliance of and the dedication of the people that are working for not just the cure, but for the technology that makes our lives better, and that are developing the new CGMs and the new insulin, and the new products, and everything from the stickers that help keep the CGMs on, and the amount of work ethic and smarts that are going into developing all these products for diabetics. And it just makes you feel so good. It makes you feel good about the industry, that they are making constant improvements to make our lives better.
I think that's right. And Jen, I think if you see all these people who've dedicated their lives to move the ball on a cure, on a better technology, on a better protocol for care, we know so many certified diabetes educators and nutritionists who have helped people like me. You almost owe it to them to be involved in the community and help their effort, because we've benefited so much from what they've done on both the technological space and the human interest space.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to hear what you're doing, and credit to you guys for being part of that message. And we do need hope when the alarms are screaming, and we wishing we weren't going through this for ourselves, for our children, for whoever. And to echo your experience, mine's been exactly the same. I do the stuff with the community, and then I do have touch points with the companies, and I've been so heartened that people who don't live with type 1 and who do, you said it, dedicate their lives to making our lives better. And there is heart in that. Yes, there's science and there's technology, but it comes from humans. And further to your point about the work that you're doing, and we touched on it with the book, you're not only helping people affected by this condition, but I think getting these messages out there and normalizing what people with type 1 diabetes go through bridges that gap between what we know it is and what other people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Very well put. I think there's two nuances to that. One is if you're not in the middle of managing type 1 or in a family that is, it's hard for you to know what they're going through. So we're going to expose that, and we have exposed that in the children's book series. The other thing that most people don't know is the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And that's clearly exploited in the book because the character has type 1. But what we're very excited about is the first 3 books necessarily there's a lot of character development. People need to know who Rhodes is and what makes him tick. People need to know how great Alana is and what makes her tick. Books 4 through whatever are going to be a lot less about character development and more about adventures. And so diabetes will become less and less. You'll still see Rhodes wearing a pump. You'll still see Alana making sure that he's going to be okay and get through the adventure du jour. But it's going to be less and less a part of the book because it can be in your life as a young person.
Yeah, we wanted to tackle something that was very important to us in each one of the books, that we could feel like we were educating the population, as you're saying, giving them a little tidbit. So again, in the first book, in School Bus Secret of the Adventures of Rhodes and Alana, Rhodes talks about the fact that he has type 1 and this conversation and what it means to prick his finger and check his blood sugar and then give himself insulin. So very basic. In the second book, we felt it would have made such a difference on Rhodes's life if he had had the ability to be screened and they had known that type 1 diabetes was coming. And the fact that we have this technology now and it's available to everyone, whether or not you have type 1 diabetes in your family, if you have a 1 in 15 odds or greater because you have someone in your immediate or extended family with type 1 diabetes, and you could know whether you have the autoantibodies and track it before it's coming and perhaps even take therapies to slow its progression, wouldn't you want to know? But people don't know about it. So we built that into the second story where Rhodes in his 8-year-old voice tells his buddy that don't you know, why didn't your parents know? And so he talks about the symptoms and he's like, you don't know, you can't see the attack that's going on in your body. My fighter cells were beating up my pancreas cells and we couldn't tell that was happening. And his friend's horrified. And he said, I got screened for my food allergies and that's how we found out I was allergic to peanuts. It sounds like your screening was the same thing. And he said, exactly. It's like relatable that you could go get your blood tested and you could find out whether that internal battle attack is happening. So we love that component. And then in the third book, Rhodes goes on a CGM. And so he gets to talk about going on a school field trip without his parents because he is independent. I mean, his mom is still watching on the app from home and tracking his blood sugar
on her phone
and his insulin dosages. So there's an illustration of that. But Rhodes is feels like a superhero. He feels like a bionic man because he can,
as an 8-year-old, his pump is talking to his CGM.
And so we explain the technology. So as Rhodes said, we wanted to develop those key touch points in the first 3 books. And then from here, we'll see where it goes, what kind of fun adventures they can do.
And we really wanted to show also that, for children who don't have access to a CGM, that in books 1 and books 2, he could manage his diabetes by sticking his finger. And then he transitions in book 3 into that latest and greatest technology.
And he talks about the shots he took before he went on a pump. So we are trying to expose families and people who don't know about diabetes to all the different ways that you can manage diabetes.
And, we're also very hopeful that as new technology comes out, we can introduce that to the characters, things that we don't know about and can't even fathom. And of course, we expect there to be a book in the next 3 to 4 years where Rhodes is cured and goes to the hospital or wherever you're going to go to get your infusion or whatever you're going to get. But that the series can continue after he's cured.
Yeah. So much in that. This is so well thought through. I'm like, wow, hats off to you guys for this.
It's been decades. We've been planning this for decades.
It's interesting you say about making sure people know about finger pricking and things because it's so easy to
think online that everyone is hooked up to insulin pumps, etc. But most people are on MDI through choice or otherwise through no choice. And my insulin pump completely broke when I was on a plane quite recently. Well, it was a few years ago now, actually, but everything shut down. Like, do not resuscitate, completely gone. Because I was on a plane, I had absolutely everything I could possibly need with me, the backup injections, the backup finger pricker, etc. And I was just like talking to myself on this flight, because obviously there was a moment of panic. And then I was like, Jen, you did it like this for 18 years. You're going to be fine. And actually at that point, I was very grateful that I had that frame of reference. I'm not saying that we would ever go back, but the way I have to kind of shift my perspective around these things that happen. But it's a really good point that you put that out there. I want to come back to screening, because I know that you're advocates for screening, and this is a new world, if you like, talking about things that we can't even fathom. And what you've witnessed in your diabetes lifetime is phenomenal, and sort of nodding to the fact that there's so much more to come. The trajectory we're on now, that again is so hopeful. It's true. But for people who don't know, you can now take a test for the autoantibodies that are the marker of type 1. And I know you're advocates for screening, and you even had your children screened as well. And that's how our paths cross, because I'm doing some work in that world. So I'd love for you to touch on how you found out about it, the decision to put it in the book, but also the decision to screen your children as well.
Yeah, thank you. So going back to our volunteer work, it was actually due to the fact that I was involved in formerly JDRF on a board, now Breakthrough T1D. And they start every meeting with a mission moment where a scientist comes and they tell you a little bit about what's the latest and greatest. And so I feel like I had an inside track when the children were 2 and 4. So 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Did I do that math right? To screening, because it wasn't being widely talked about then. And I heard about this and I approached Rhodes with this information. And it is an interesting conversation to have with a diabetic parent, because my perspective was, wow, we can get this information. We could know in advance of a clinical diagnosis. Wouldn't it be great? This is a no-brainer. And Rhodes ultimately got there, but I think I did not factor in that human emotional component of the potential for guilt of, well, but if we find out he does have the autoantibodies, is that because of me? And so then it sent us down that rabbit hole of researching the statistics and trying to get, what are the odds? And then understanding that, because as having a type 1 parent puts you in the category of 1 in 15. But then if you have a father with type 1 and a father who was diagnosed before the age of 10, then that doubles. So then you're looking at 1 in 7, 1 in 8. So that doing our research, getting that information, having the heart-to-heart conversations got us to the place of having the information. Like, how grateful would you have been had your family had some time to prepare, to educate yourselves, to get a handle on the management, to find a good endocrinologist? You didn't have one in your small town. You had amazing people, but you did not have a big hospital system. You had to find an endocrinologist and drive to it. So having that time
to build out your team that you will ultimately need to rely on. Yeah. There's a lot of practical reasons that ultimately swayed me. Of course, the easiest, the most low-hanging fruit is, if you know ahead of time, it can really help you not develop DKA as you're transitioning from the first stage to second stage, and then third stage, of course, is full-blown type 1 diabetes. As you're making that transition from stage 2 to stage 3, you can catch it in time so that you don't go through DKA. And of course, the studies now show that in addition to the damage that can do to your body, it's also easier to manage. Not easier, that's a terrible way to put it. It's less difficult to manage and keep your blood sugar in range if you haven't gone through DKA in your life than if you did spend time in DKA.
And
But
I'll say we're not doctors, but we have spoken with doctors. And so we made a point of doing some research, but then also communicating, asking the questions of his endocrinologist, seeking out pediatric endocrinologists, having the conversations with scientists who are developing treatments, and trying to get as much information as we could. And that's how we garnered these information. We actually read a pediatric study that was done of children who had been diagnosed in DKA, and you look over their lifetime, and it just becomes, they had more highs and lows. It was the study concluded that it was more difficult for them to keep their blood sugar in range. They were less likely to have blood sugar in range over the course of their lifetime. So I grasped at those little things because he's very analytical. So if I was able to present, hey, read this study, hey, have this conversation, ask these questions, it gave us this information that made us very confident in the decision.
Yeah, and I think also, to Lana's point, it helps you get ready if that day ultimately comes. And then, of course, now with products on the market that can delay the onset, and you think right now the studies are very promising and showing a 2 to 3 year delay, maybe more. And if you put that in perspective, if someone does the testing and shows they're predisposed and that they're a candidate for the therapy and decides to pursue it, that's a lot of ifs. But if you're ever there and you think about what 3 years can mean to someone's life, that's middle school. And if a kid can go 6th, 7th, and 8th grade without developing type 1 diabetes, or put it off till after puberty, that can be a game changer. And since we're pretty adamant that within the next 5 years, and for real this time, within the next 5 years,
don't say it.
Within a certain amount of time, there's going to be either a biological or technological cure for type 1 diabetes. The longer that you put off the onset,
the better.
The closer you get to when we ultimately have that biological, technological cure. So,
and Jen, I just want to say, so we did finish close that loop. We checked at when our kids were really little. And at the time, there was a product, this is in the US. I don't know if it's available across internationally, but we were able to order a product that came to our house. And there was an at-home finger stick test. And so it came to our home, and we pricked their fingers, and we just put dried blood drops in little circles, and it was a folded up postcard, and we shipped it away, and then you get the results. We also participated. We continued talking with doctors, and just because you get negative autoantibodies at one age, we decided that we wanted to rescreen. It sounded like because we screened so young, we had negative autoantibodies, it would make sense to continue rescreening them. So we actually were able to enroll them in the US. We have a TrialNet study, which is a research program. And so we were able to enroll them as the children of a type 1. And so they were able to go in annually and have just a blood draw for the autoantibodies. So they would go in and have a blood draw, and we make it a day of it. So when the kids go in to have their blood drawn, they get a lollipop, and they have enthusiasm, and they understand the importance of it. And we want them to be understand what they're doing and to be part of the decision now that they're a little older. But it's something that they have wanted to do. They have wanted to screen. They've wanted to have the information so that they can prepare for it. And so there are lots of avenues. And now you can just go to your physician. You could go to your GP or your pediatrician and say, I'd like to be screened. I have an autoimmune condition in my family, whether it's type 1 or not, or I am aware of this and it's something I want to be screened for. And your doctor can order, like they would check your cholesterol. They can order a blood panel and get the results of an autoantibody screening. So there are so many more ways to do it, even today, 7 years later, that if you have the desire to do it, you can get the information and then take it from there.
Yeah, thank you for laying that out, because this is a new world and I don't think that many people know about it. And thank you as well for articulating the many sides of it, because information is incredible, but it can be confronting, and you touched on it there. I sort of liken it to, like, I was a hard no on anything to do with insulin pumps for a very long time. And now that we wear sensors, glucose sensors, certainly in the UK as kind of a standard, I think that builds a bridge sometimes to the idea of having something technological on your body. But at first I was like, I don't want that on me. But what it gives me and the information and the decisions I'm able to make from that sensor is incredible. But it's not always clear cut, right? As you kind of illustrated there.
Everybody has to come to it on their own terms with their own lived experience. Like you, I didn't put, maybe for some of the same reasons, I didn't want to wear an insulin pump for a long time, and part of it I'm sure was vanity, but part of it was I felt like I was doing well enough with shots and finger sticks, and I also do think that part of it was the technology really hadn't come along enough to feel like you could fully rely on
You're talking
a
about
pump.
20 years ago.
But this was in
Yeah.
and so I didn't go on a pump until after college, and I was less concerned about having something on me after college and when I was in the workforce. And it was still 10 years until CGMs were worth wearing, and then I added that ultimately too. But everybody has to come to the decision of what to do with their care at the right time based on their lived experience. Screening's not for everybody, but we ultimately concluded after some real discernment that it was right for our family.
Yeah, it's exciting to me that we have these opportunities, like you say, for children and adults not to go into DKA and these very traumatic entry points into a world of type 1 that until the point you need to know about it, a lot of people don't know anything about it. Why would you in a lot of cases? Yeah, incredible that it's written into the books as well. Like, it's part of history now, with Rhodes and Alana. So you've sort of alluded to what's next for them, but I just want to ask briefly, like, what's the response been like as you've built out this world, as they're going on their adventures? What kind of conversations have you had with people who are touched by type 1 and otherwise?
It's been the response, of course, has been very heartwarming, and it's interesting how sort of the tiers of audience have sort of presented themselves. We always wanted the book to be an adventure series, not a book about diabetes, not a book about a diabetes character, but an adventure series where a character happens to have diabetes or a chronic condition. And so at first, there were a lot of folks that, even close family and friends, who thought, well, the book wasn't for them because this was a book about diabetes.
Oh,
And
that's so nice that you did that for
that's
your community, for your children, for those people in your circles. Good for you.
good for you. But once it got in their hands, or better yet, in their children's hands, and they realized it was an adventure series that could entertain while also maybe teaching you something that you didn't know you were learning. The audience and the interest has really bloomed, really blossomed once people get by the idea that it's not a book about diabetes or about a diabetic character. And like I said, now that we've done so much character developments in books 1 through 3, the next few books will be even more straight adventure series. But it has been so it's been heartwarming to sort of see over time that our primary audience, no doubt, is the diabetes community, and it was well received by them. But then there was a second tranche of people who didn't know anything about diabetes, but had heard about the book or knew us or saw us on social and bought it. And then the third tranche was much older people, like I said, most of whom had been affected by type 2, who didn't really know how to talk to their grandkids in this climate of iPads and disinterest in all things and distraction. They were able to use the book as a tool to teach their grandkids about diabetes.
You can get our book as an ebook for Kindle.
That's
FYI.
true. That's
so
true.
If your kids only read their books on the computer, one thing I'll say, Jen, is that I had a lot of conversations with parents on the screening front, and they were very set in their decision. There are some parents that say, I just don't want to know because I don't want to worry. And I didn't want to persuade them. I just presented our situation and why it made sense for us. But what's been incredible is giving the book to the family And then hearing that the children actually will say, Mama, I didn't know that we could do that. We got to test my little brother. He doesn't want to go to the hospital. I hated being there and getting poked for the first time. We could teach him how to poke his finger at home. Holy cow. When that hits you as a parent and you hear it from literally the mouths of babes of, wow, we could spare my sibling, my cousins, my friends at school from the trauma of that sort of dramatic diagnosis, to giving them this information, and that the kids are the ones that are telling their parents, let's find out. Oh, that it like sends shivers all over my
Kids
body.
are always the best advocates.
But then it's like they're doing the work for us.
Incredible. Wow. Very powerful as well. This has been such a hopeful conversation. I think hope is the word. You know, there is a lot that we go through and deal with, but you guys are testament to what is possible and what can be put out there in the world to make this more positive and more hopeful. Please tell everyone where we can find you and where people can get hold of the books as well.
Thank you so much. Well, you can visit rhodesandalana.com, and that's the web address for our books. And they will send you to links you can buy if you purchase books on Amazon, or I know Amazon ships internationally. In the US, barnesandnoble.com carries the books. So internationally global online book retailers all have access to The Adventures of Rhodes and Alana. So you can just search for that title. Again, School Bus Secret and Bully Blues, the first 2 books are out. And Zoo Goes Wild, book 3, we're expecting to launch early May. So in a matter of very soon.
And you can follow us on social media too. If you just look for Rhodes and Alana, you'll find us on all the social media channels.
That's right, on Instagram and Facebook, and you can follow Rhodes and Alana there as well. And it'll take you to our support group page, which is thediabetessupportgroup.org, where we have posted videos of us sharing information, tips and tricks from living with someone with diabetes or living with diabetes for 40 years. And so you can watch our videos where we hopefully are encouraging and teaching some of the things we've learned.
We're very proud of our support group. We like Alana said, we're not doctors, but we have a lot of practical experience, and we focus on the positive and proactive management. And the content is 1 and 2 minute videos about diabetes management from my perspective as a diabetic, from Alana's perspective as a support person. Those videos get posted on social and on the website, and then become part of our library. And so a lot of times when we meet newly diagnosed families, we send them to our website and our library, where you can search on a topic and find a 1 or 2 minute video about it. And if you can't, you can tag us and we can make a video about it. So, and most of the sharing happens on that site and also through our social media channels to make it a fully functioning online diabetes community.
Amazing. And I'll add all that information in the episode description. I've got my Bully Blues.
Oh, it looks great, Jen. I love it.
So there we are. I can just imagine as well. We didn't touch on your career because we've covered so much ground, but it sounds like you're having a lot of fun becoming book characters at the same time as
We had
to draw straws. Who when we said we're both practicing lawyers, and we said we really want to get these books done. This is something that we want to see happen before our children get too old. And we sort of looked at each other, and we didn't have to draw straws. I said, I'll do it. I'd love to do this. I was a transactional lawyer. I wrote contracts. So writing was in my bones. And so I said, I can translate this into producing children's books. So it's been really, really fun.
It's been a lot of hard work. I credit Alana for running through a lot of brick walls, running up a lot of steep hills to get us through. But what we've learned in producing the first 2 books really helped us, we think, in bringing a good third product to market. And we're excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where these adventures take you. And I can't wait to be wearing my Alana t-shirt as well.
It's going to be fantastic.
Maybe I'll get a Rhodes one. Why not?
I love it.
A plushie, like a stuffed Alana doll might be fun.
There you go. I love it. I love the work you're doing. I love the message you're spreading. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us, Jen. We really appreciate it. And thanks for all you're doing to spread the good word in the diabetes community and beyond.
Thank you.
Thank you. We loved it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Type 1-on-1. Please remember that nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as medical advice. I'm definitely not a healthcare professional. If you like what you hear, hit subscribe and do leave a little review on iTunes if you have time. It really helps to spread the word about type 1 diabetes. And thank you so much for listening.